A shadow world does exist, a world out of the corner of the eye. Most of us have experienced a feeling that we were being silently observed by an unseen something. We have heard faint, indistinct sounds which we could not identify, or perhaps seen a fleeting, unexplainable shadow, as if something from an unknown edge of our reality was trying to communicate with us. We have been gripped by an eerie, mysterious feeling that, for no logical reason, causes us to momentarily shiver. This folklore and these stories are here to remind us that there may be more to our world than we fully understand. Hello, and welcome to Folklore Feature. Today, we have a couple more shorter stories for you to listen to, uh, full of kind of spooky happenings and mysterious phenomenon. Uh, these two are a little bit different. They're not typical ghost stories, so they get points for that, in my opinion. Uh, I hope you enjoy. We're going to get right into them, but I want to thank everybody. The channel is growing, actually, a little bit at a time. We're getting close to 40 subscribers, which is more than I thought I was going to reach, but I wanted to thank everybody who listens and subscribes, and we're going to dive right into some stories. The House of Smoke and Fire. In south central Kentucky, there is a haunted house. That is not so unusual. There are lots of those. However, this one was different because the owners had a standing offer to give it to anyone who would spend the night in it. A young couple has now purchased the house and is renovating it, against the advice of neighbors. Only time will tell if these young people will encounter any of the demonic manifestations witnessed by others. For years, the stories have been told that no lights of any kind will burn in this house. Smoke without fire fills the rooms, and rumbling sounds are heard late at night. The original owner moved out of the house over 30 years ago when these unusual signs began. Several men in the community tried to spend a night in the structure, but fear overcame bravery. The men claimed to have seen a man with large red eyes following them from room to room. They also claimed that the house shook and filled with smoke, making it impossible to breathe. Needless to say, they did not stay the night. In 1978, three men from Ohio told the owner that for $5,000 they would spend a night in the house. He wanted to sell the property, and hoping to disprove the existence of ghosts or diabolical demonstrations, he agreed to pay the men. The men entered. All seemed normal and quiet in the large house, although there were no steady lights. An occasional flash, as if matches were being struck, could be seen by curious people outside. About 1 o'clock in the morning, when most of the curiosity seekers had gone home and all was still, the three men inside began screaming that they could not get out, that they were on fire and could not breathe. When the police finally broke down a door, the three men came crawling out of the house, unable to stand. Two men had white hair and seemed to have aged beyond their years, while the third man had lost nearly half of his body weight and pulled most of his hair out by the roots. All three were hopelessly insane. They were committed to an asylum, where they remain to this day. No one knows what terrible thing they saw. Strangely, no noise has ever been heard and no smoke has ever been seen outside the house. These unusual events happen only when someone is inside and only at night. Another aspect of this phenomenon is that no one has ever died, naturally or unnaturally, as would be expected in happenings of this nature. I have checked the history of this dwelling thoroughly. The building site may hold a clue to the abnormal happenings reported here. It was built within a few yards and on a direct line with a cave that extends for several miles into Pine Mountain. The Cumberland River cuts through the mountain thousands of years ago, dividing this huge cavern. The part on the south side of the river can still be explored today, but the northern end of this cavern was sealed by the United States government during the early 1930s. Strange markings were found on the bedrock several feet below the ground's surface when workers were building the bridge across the Cumberland River on Route 119. I personally know an elderly lady whose husband and brother-in-law were in the work crew that found these markings. Experts have studied the signs and are convinced they are not of Indian origin. By following the direction these symbols indicated, 7 men found a small opening at the northern end of the huge cavern. Clearing away debris at this previously unknown entrance, the men entered a cave and were amazed to find a rock bridge that crossed an underground stream. Across the bridge, they could see huge stone chairs and tables, along with what appeared to be stacks of large brick. Along the walls, as far as their lights could penetrate, huge murals depicted extinct animals and large, strangely dressed people. The men swore that a large stone tree reflected their lamp's light, as if it were metal. None of the men would cross the bridge. They reported their discovery to their foreman, who contacted government officials. For some unexplained reason, the officials had the cave entrance sealed immediately with tons of rock. No cause for this action was ever given, but people were warned to leave the cavern closed. It remains sealed and forgotten until today. Author's note: are the rumbling sounds and movement of the building caused by an underground stream? Is the smoke really gases from the Earth's core? Gases which might cause hallucinations? This would account for the inability to breathe and the sensation of being on fire that several people claim to have experienced. But why will no lights burn in this old house? Okay, so that story there with the house, pretty simple one. It feels like it should be a ghost story, but the author has taken it in the direction of, I believe he's trying to imply, giants. It's definitely something that's become more popular in recent years, the concept of giants in America, in Europe, usually with strange powers, sometimes tied with aliens, sometimes not. I love the concept of ancient giants. From the very first one I remember reading as a kid, David and Goliath, the idea of giants have fascinated me. And and not just that they were giants, but like Goliath, he had extra fingers, if you don't know the story. So there was something going on there. And there's a little bit more, biblically speaking, but I've always liked the stories of giants, and it's not something I'm willing to completely throw out as, well, that just can't be true. But anyway, I rambled on for a bit on this one, but I really enjoyed that one. The Strange Cavern, it's interesting. I know this won't shock you, but I could find no records of it online. I'm not sure where this guy found most of his, but if you're from that area and you've got any stories, please leave a comment. I would love to know if you know about this at all. I don't know why the U.S. government would cover it up, but who knows? That's always how it goes in these stories. So, all right, we're going to get into our next one. It's a real short one. I apologize if you wanted something longer, but we're just going to get right into this nice short little story. Journey of the Ring. Daniel Busk in Barwick, Kentucky, narrated this strange tale to me in 1958. Fondly called Uncle Dan, At the age of 94, he could remember events 80 years past as if they had happened only a few days ago. Josephine Tyler and George Thomas had been married only a few months in the spring of 1862 when George decided to join the Union Army. Leaving his young, pregnant wife, he rode to Lexington, Kentucky to enlist. Young Josephine lived in a cabin near her father's property while her husband was away, and in due time a baby son was born, a son never to be seen by his father. Everyone thought the war would be over in a few months, but the months dragged into a year, and Josie began to worry about her husband. She had received only 3 letters from him, telling of places he had been and battles in which he had fought. In his final letter, still owned by one of his descendants, George told Josie that he loved her and would see that somehow she would get his wedding ring if he should be killed. Several months passed with no further word from George, and Josie wrote to the U.S. War Department for more information. Imagine her surprise and anguish when they reported that George had been killed in action the previous year, over 300 miles from home. Josie never actually knew who had written the last letter from George, but the handwriting was the same on all 3. On a particular July night in 1865, Josie was eating supper with her brother and young son when their 6 dogs started barking and fighting over something outside. Taking a lantern, Josie and her brother went to see what the cause of this commotion was, and saw that the dogs were fighting over a man's hand. Josie's brother ran them off by yelling and shooting his gun into the air. When Josie reached to pick up the hand and put it out of the dog's reach, she noticed a long, red scar. Her heart skipped a beat. The scar looked exactly like one on the back of her husband's left hand. Looking closer in the light of the lantern, Josie saw a wedding band on the 3rd finger. Although trembling with fear, she removed the ring from the hand. Inside the ring were the initials GT and JT. Josie screamed in anguish. This was the ring her husband had worn when he rode off to war. Putting the hand between 2 boards in the fence, Josie and her brother took the ring inside the house. The next morning, when they looked for the hand, it was gone. How could a man's hand possibly stay preserved for 2 years after death? Where had the hand been since George's death? How did it find its way home? And who wrote the 3rd letter, saying that Josie would get her husband's ring back, no matter what happened to him? Okay, a nice, spooky, mysterious tale bringing closure to a widow. I think that's pretty classic. It's not really one to ponder much about. I'm sure that probably didn't happen. Um, that one's just, in a way, it's meant to make you feel good, but in a mysterious way. I don't have a lot to say about this one. I did like it because it is different than a lot of other stories I've been reading out of this book. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I do want to mention, for anyone who's sticking around, I know that this book is called The Tragedy at Devil's Hollow, and you may be starting to wonder why I haven't read it yet, because it is like, it's the main story in the book. And the reason is, I'm not actually a huge fan of the ending of the story. And it's a longer read for sure. It's the main one. I do intend to do it still. I will. But I may I would feel kind of guilty. I want to like change the ending a little bit, but I don't know. So far I've been sticking to these stories pretty close. But the concept of like passing on folklore and stories has always entailed the storyteller changing things. It's part of the tradition. So I'm a little bit unsure what to do about that. Maybe I'll just read it as is. But in the future, there are stories that I like the concept, but are written poorly. that I kind of would like to put my own spin on. I'll definitely be sure to let people know if I do that so they know going into it. But I don't know, there's so many interesting stories that are told poorly that I'd like to take a stab at kind of retelling it, which I believe is part of folklore. That's part of the tradition. The storyteller changing it and adding to it and trying to make it better and more interesting for his listeners. So, yeah, thank you for listening for all that. I'm going to sign off now. Uh, I hope everyone has a good day or night, whatever it is, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Hopeful American signing out.